By way of introduction, my name is Rokhsana Fiaz. I am the Mayor of Newham, and I am also the London Council's member lead on data and innovation. And in the context of my particular interest in this area, previously having been the employment and skills lead for London councils on the executive, it struck me in the context of the world of disruption that we're presently living in and what that means for the future world of work. There had been very little thought given around the employment skills requirement as it relates to a fast growing sector of the global economy. Back in 2021, the UK government at the time launched its white paper on data and had positioned its intention for the UK to become the preeminent destination for data, AI, and all things technology in the globe. Currently, it's occupied by America, China, with the UK coming at a third ranking. And as many of you will be aware, we have operated in this space at London Council's level through our work via the London Office of Technology and Innovation. And I've got my colleague Sam Nutt, who will be leading on the briefing. I wanted to also just really flag prior to his PowerPoint presentation that there is a lot understood about AI and a lot misunderstood, and no doubt many of you in your everyday lived experiences are beginning to see AI crop up here, there, and everywhere, including if you access any of the social media apps, there's a lot of AI discourse taking place. In the context of London councils and local authorities in the capital, but also elsewhere, the transformative potential of AI in the context of financial constraints that we're experiencing as local authorities after 14 years of austerity, and having noted the key headlines of the autumn statement yesterday, it's very evident that the government has reiterated and is amplifying its reformist agenda, and that means public sector reform. The position of us here in the data and innovation team, working closely with LOTI and Eddie Copeland, who leads LOTI with the 12 plus strong team at the London Office for Technology and Information, is as follows. As with all technology, artificial intelligence isn't the silver bullet. It is an important instrument that could be used and leveraged as we think about the reformist requirements of national government vis-a-vis the public sector, but also the reformist requirements that political leaders will want to bring to bear to the organisations that they lead, in order to ensure that we have fit for purpose 21st century people-facing organisations that are doing public good. And AI, in that regard, can help support that wider transformative piece, not least because we are, as mentioned, facing quite considerable financial pressures. So AI, as with any form of innovation, can help contribute to efficiencies and savings and higher performance public services. It is important and imperative, and this has certainly been something that emerged in our discussions as political leaders and members during the time of COVID-19, the use of data. And similarly, it's vital that in the context of privacy, security, people's personal data, when we're looking at new innovations in this space, we remain ethical and responsible users of new technology and data, including AI. So we're going to be learning about how that needs to be very much at the forefront of your thinking as members, as you take back your learning from this briefing to your organisations. The final thing, two things that I wanted to say with regards to what you're about to hear, is that I appreciate across London There are really important and interesting journeys that have already been embarked on by organisations that you are part of the political leadership team of. In Newham, we started back in 2021 with our Newham Sparks programme, which is now evolving into Newham Data Economy. We've partnered with some significant organisations, and we really do value the work that we're doing with LOTI. Most recently, in terms of our work in the AI space, we've launched the Centre for AI in Local Government with the University of East London, and it's a local partnership that will matchmake university experts and students with the challenges around public service delivery across a whole number of public service areas, be that TA, be it climate emergency, with the data that we hold in order to make meaning, sense, and effective use of that through leveraging the potency of AI. So that's just one example, but there are many other examples elsewhere in London in terms of the advances that local authorities in their space are making in this area of London's economy. And I think there's all to play for, and I'm looking forward to working with you all as members interested in this area of work as it relates to you locally, but also on a London-wide basis. And whilst we're introducing AI in local government through the London in Brief conversation series that London Council organises, I will be sending out details about ongoing briefings and meetings that we will be planning through the data and innovation team at London Councils in collaboration with LOTI and also our work with the GLA. So keep an eye out on details of future events, because we want to build up a community of interested politicians in the capital that will help us really mobilise in this space. So I'm going to pause there. In terms of just some practicalities, you'll hear from Sam Nutt, who I'll be asking to introduce himself in a moment. And if you've got any questions, please do drop them into the chat, and we'll pick them up as Sam comes along or during the Q&A session after his slide deck presentation. On that note, Sam, over to you, and I trust everyone enjoys this conversation.
Thank you very much, Mayor. And Rhiannon, do you want to jump to the next slide? So yeah, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day. My name's Sam Nutt. I'm the researcher and data ethicist at LOTI, the London Office of Technology Innovation. So my background very big on the data ethics side, but over the last 18 months or 2 years, I've also been leading our work on artificial intelligence, on AI. So very excited to be here today to kind of share what's the state of play for AI in local government, what are we working on, where are we going with this, what might be the possibilities. So if we jump to the next slide. For those who don't know, the LOTI, the London Office of Technology and Innovation, we sit across 28 of the local authorities in London and the Greater London Authority, and we sort of sit within London councils. And we're the collaborative innovation community, so we help our members in their ambitions around digital data technology to achieve what their sort of priorities as individual authorities, but by working collaboratively. So as I said, my sort of area of work is on artificial intelligence, on ethics. And if we go to the next slide. What I'll cover today is first a brief introduction on AI, just so we're sort of all singing from the same hymn sheet when it comes to understanding the technology. And then the first thing I'll talk about a little bit is what do residents actually think about AI? What are their opinions based off different bits of research from different organizations? And then I'll walk through how are and can and should councils be using AI with a section as well ending on how we use AI responsibly, thinking about that ethics piece. If we go to the next slide, Rhiannon. So firstly, what is AI? Next slide. I've got two definitions for you here to kind of show the incredible range of definitions and the different utility bits of different types of definitions. So on the one level, you've got Alan Turing, in some ways the founder of artificial intelligence as a field. And this is a definition that, for example, the House of Lords AI Committee have adopted. It's the science of making computers do things that require intelligence when done by humans. The issue with that, I suppose, and legally speaking in the future, when there's future legislation on this, is that's an incredibly broad and possibly contested definition. And that's why you have bits of legislation like the EU AI Act, which go into a lot more detail trying to actually define what AI is. But if we go to the next slide, Rhiannon, I think for our purposes in local government, I just want to sort of mention that we in LOTI adopt quite a broad scope when thinking about AI, and I think there's lots of different levels to it. So on the one hand, you've got the types of models. Is this sort of like outer ring? You might have things like risk-based verification or advanced analytics using some bits like machine learning. But the big trend, I suppose, has been around generative AI and foundation models in the last couple of years, based on a combination of a type of model called a transformer and the ability to process huge amounts of data using more advanced chips. And that sort of led to these foundation models. And then off the back of that, we've developed, products, and these are the kind of things that we're starting to look at now in local government. So ChatGPT will be using a type of model, a type of large language model, and that's a type of sort of foundation model. But we've got all these different products now in local government that we're looking at. So when you hear ChatGPT, it's a type of language model, it's a type of model, and some of these products use different models. But the main thing is, I think when we talk about AI, a lot of the time we are talking about generative AI, but there are also other types of artificial intelligence that I'll mention as we go on. So next slide, Rhiannon. What's AI good for? So as I mentioned, we've got those other types of AI, narrow AI, and that's really good for predicting things, in particular, quantitative data. That's, the things we've been able to do quite well, these types of machine learning, not just in local government, but in the wider economy and in society. Generative AI, though, the big opportunities there, I suppose, for councils is that, in particular, councils sit on a huge trove of data, unstructured data, data from surveys, for example, or case notes. This is data that really we haven't been able to analyze before, and generative AI allows us to do that, categorizing it, searching it better, manipulating that text, and also potentially allowing for easier interactions with councils, for example, through chatbots that speak in language that's more easily understood and accessible. In context, then, we go to the next slide. So what do residents think about AI? I've got a few findings here that I think are quite interesting. The first thing I think to say is the public have very mixed perceptions towards AI, and that is trending negatively over the last couple of years. YouGov split the public into different sort of categories of ignorant, pessimists, and optimists, and they've sort of created 3 different persona groups based off public attitudes. So there's those sort of, some people very excited for it, some people very scared and weary about it, some people really not sure what to make of it. And that's kind of the state of play at the moment. On a high level, if we go to the next slide, Rhiannon. There's also very different attitudes towards different types of applications. The most popular use case for AI in general is in health, in particular for R&D. Where people are particularly wary, though, is around things like assessing welfare or job eligibility. People are scared, I suppose, of the automation of decisions for that sorts of thing. Also, defense and targeted ads are often seen as bad. But I guess the important thing to mention here is that there are very different opinions towards different use cases for AI. It's not a sort of blanket, we like it or we don't like it. People will sort of like it or dislike it based off the context of its use. Next slide, Rhiannon. This is some research from the Department for Science, Technology and Innovation, and I think this is foundational when we think about trust and ethics. Only social media companies are trusted less than government to use the public data. And only 36% of the public think that we're transparent with how we use data. And I think that's a huge kick up the bum for us as a sector, to really think about how we develop trustworthy processes to improve upon this, because we know how hard it is to do innovation and deliver new types of services when we don't have that sort of foundational trust. Next slide, Rhiannon. And in terms of how we might build that trust, the greatest concerns that the public do have around data and AI are around, in particular, cybersecurity and information governance. They don't want their data to be hacked or stolen or leaked or used by the wrong companies. And so I think if there are two areas I would suggest particularly thinking about when it comes to how you might build trust based off this public attitudes research, it would be thinking about those two things. So how do councils actually use AI then? Rhiannon, next slide. And we'll jump one more. The first thing to say is, so we went out and spoke to all of our members in LOTI, the kind of chief digital innovation officers, and they had 4 messages that they wanted us to share with yourselves as councillors that they wanted you to hear. I think the first thing is, to get the most out of AI requires us to invest in our skills and capabilities a lot more than we currently are. The technology in some ways is not the problem in terms of adopting it. It's actually all of the things around it, the skills, the right people, the right infrastructure, the right other bits of technology. That's the stuff that we need to be working on if we're going to get the most out of AI. Also, as Mayor said, AI isn't going to fix every problem. So we need to fix those other things, address some of those foundational bits, think creatively about how we adopt AI, and recognize that it isn't a sort of panacea. And actually, the adoption isn't a linear path. So over the past year, we know that there's been a cohort, for example, of officers and people in the public who really have been excited with AI and jumped on the bandwagon, really excited using it, adopting the tools. But actually, in the sort of innovation lexicon, the slow laggards, there will always be a large group of people who are slower adopting these things. So whilst it seems very quick at the moment, the adoption, we know that in practice within our organizations, that will slow down and plateau and then accelerate and plateau. And then that sort of contextual bit, I think, is really important in that there are different ways of developing AI. So what one council does really well might not be the same solution for another council. And I suppose that's where LOTI comes in to help different organizations understand in those contexts what's good for them. Next slide, Rhiannon. So as I mentioned, AI, if we go back one maybe, is it's the top of the stack of innovation capabilities. It's built on top of the people, the skills, the different ways of working, the governance bits, the assets and resources, and the data. And so being able to use AI well is actually being able to do all of those other things well first, and that will enable us to adopt it. Next slide, Rhiannon. The 3 things we hear from our members and from other networks, the LGA across the country and other parts of the public sector, the 3 things that council are particularly interested in using AI for. The first, and I think by a distance, is finding more efficient and cheaper ways of operating. The second, improving the resident experience of council services. And the third, improving the jobs of our staff. And that can take different dimensions. So often the focus is initially on productivity, but then what we found is actually things like well-being, improving accessibility for staff. Those sorts of things have been huge benefits that maybe weren't the original intended impacts, but actually have been meaningful dividends for organizations adopting AI. They're kind of the 3 main areas. Next slide, Rhiannon. In terms of that development, I mentioned there's different contexts, for different authorities, and there's different ways of developing it. There's those tools that we're buying. So there's these off-the-shelf products, things like Microsoft Copilot, that every council really in London and most councils across the UK are buying and piloting. These are sort of things that plug into Word or Excel and sort of help as a productivity assistant for staff. Some authorities also have the capacity in-house, but not everyone does in terms of data science teams to develop tools and services based off models. So actually maybe training it on their own data. And then I think a common path we're seeing emerge as well, a bit like the partnership with Newham and UEL, is collaborating with partner organizations where there maybe is the capacity outside of the council, but the data and the problems inside the council. So finding solutions like that. I think the really big thing is an LGA survey found 63% of councils are buying AI from external providers. So I think procurement and focusing on procurement is a really big area to focus and think about when it comes to how we use AI. Next slide. In terms of the types of solutions, it's the corporate roles is the most common function, things like administration, meeting minutes, procurement. But after that, it's the priority service areas that you probably hear about in your conversations as councillors. It's social care, advice and benefits, and planning and housing are some of the big areas where councils have said that they're looking to explore. And actually, LOTI, earlier in the year, we did research on housing and adult social care to understand what might be some of the emerging opportunities. And I'll talk a little bit about a couple of things that council are doing in that space in some of the next slides. So Here is an example of, it's an AI assistant for frontline social care workers. 11 councils are currently trying it. It's a product called Magic Notes, although there are different products, different approaches available. The big one here is the productivity gains originally. That was impacts estimated at around 15 hours saved per caseworker per month. And the idea is this will be a tool that automatically transcribes and then writes up the transcription in a sort of useful format to the caseworker. So if they need to fill out a particular form, it will complete it into that form, and then they copy, well, they check that that's correct, all the information is correct, and then they will put that into the right place manually. And that sort of saves an estimated 15 hours per caseworker per month. So you can see it's really improved the ability of the caseworker to do their job, but also they can have more easy face-to-face conversations because they're not manually writing notes as they speak. So it's improved that interaction with the resident. And over time, that sort of level of time saved also enables savings and productivity gains, and that time to be invested elsewhere in the council. So it helps with their efficiencies as well. Next slide. Westminster, this is something that they've been able to develop in-house. So it's that different way of developing. Their waste reporting tool. This was actually part of the new Westminster leadership's their manifesto was to improve this tool, and they use a combination of an image classification tool. So a resident will take a photo of some waste, and then the image classification tool will guess, is it this type of waste? And then you say yes in the chatbot, which is a different type of AI. And what they've been able to do through this combination of these different models is reduce the time it takes to report waste down to 80 seconds for a resident. So a really big improvement there, investing in the sort of experience of the resident as a user of a council service. Next slide. Iris, this is a slightly different type of AI. So not necessarily using generative AI here, although they are starting to build components on, but they're using what we call machine vision. So they've got a digital twin of their borough, basically a Google Maps type mapping of their borough, and the machine vision, the computer vision, will enable them to basically see the computer to see different elements based off that sort of virtual map of the borough. And the first use case is street advertising, where they identified in the pilot £48,000 in additional revenue that they weren't collecting from street adverts that weren't paying business rates. So they used the computer vision to map all the adverts, and then they sort of cross-referenced that to their map of the adverts that they knew were paying business rates and realized they could collect 48k in revenue, and that was just in 3 wards. So that's, again, different type of AI, but they're sort of generating the revenue, not necessarily sort of finding the efficiency. Next slide. And the last one I'm going to mention, and I think this is a fun one because you can go and actually play with it yourselves on the call, although please don't sort of for now pay attention to me, but then please do go play with this. So it's on the Barking and Dagenham Council website. On the front page, you'll see there's a search tool. It's in beta now, and this is based off a large language model, so you can go in and search. So I put in, how do I pay my council tax, and it will cross-reference all of the public-facing documents. So no private data is ever used in this. It's just the public-facing documents, and it will share with the links to those documents, so you know that it's not sort of made it up. It will always cross-reference it with a link. Here are the different sort of answers to your questions, and you can, what I would really encourage you to do, I suppose, is go and challenge it. So, ask the difficult questions. I've done that for an hour or so. Like, what can I make it say? That, and they've done a fantastic job in Barking Dagenham in-house, making sure that it responds relevantly. It doesn't say anything harmful or anything wrong like this, and that's a really a big testimony to the team there and their capacities to develop this tool. Next slide. So as I say, the last section I will cover before Q&A section is how do we use this responsibly? And as my title suggests, data ethicist, this is really key for me in terms of adopting AI. And we heard those bits at the start about the low levels of trust. And so for me, this is a really important part of the adoption process of AI. If we want to get the benefits out of it, we have to do that responsibly. If we go to the next slide, we know historically, not just in local government, but in the rest of the public sector or in private sector, if you get it wrong, there will be consequences reputationally. But in terms of that trust that you build up with your residents over time, that we know is so important, especially for us as local authorities and how we deliver services that are based on relationships. That trust is so important for us. So we really need to be careful that we're getting this right. So how do LOTI help? We go to the next slide, Rhiannon. what are some of those risks in local government? Here's a few, and this is not exhaustive. And I guess the issue sometimes with AI is there's so many things emerging. It's, the challenges are multiplying, and so that's why in some ways we need to collaborate. But here's some of the risks that sort of I think are big and coming up when I speak to authorities. So the AI tool might be biased, and so that might be discriminating against people based on particular protected characteristics or different groups, and that might be directly or it might be indirectly. And so we have to be very careful on how we design and monitor tools for that. Giving inaccurate outputs that might result in harmful or incorrect decisions. So that might be the tool, there's something called hallucinations, where it will effectively make up data that looks correct, but actually is not based on any sort of foundation of truth. And we could make decisions off that, and that could be harmful potentially. There's the issue of leaking or data or being vulnerable to cybersecurity threats. And that, as I mentioned on those earlier slides, we know that residents, especially the residents who are concerned about AI and how we use data in councils, is a massive driver for trust, whether or not we can do that well. And obviously we have stories like the TfL cyber attack at the moment that shows that this is a real possibility that we should be thinking about. There's a big issue, I think, too, with all the hype around AI, that we buy things that don't work. So we have to be really careful and rigorous in evaluating and buying good technology. And I guess cumulatively, the effect of all of these things is that we might harm public or also staff trust by using AI. In particular, other thinking around maybe a lack of transparency. We might automate the wrong tasks that were actually foundational tasks that we really should keep humans doing. Next slide. So this is a slide I'm simply not going to spend time talking through, but I just want to mention that this is basically how I help the authorities as the data ethicist. Is we have a framework for all of the capabilities that we think a council might need. And it's basically based off all of the research that amazing other organizations have done. And I basically mapped out what does a local government need to be doing and thinking about if they want to be ethical and responsible users of these types of technology. In summary, if we go to the next slide, what this really means in practice in detail is we start with some high-level principles. And these are really common principles. They've been adopted, basically the same principles in almost every public sector organization in London, in the UK, private sector organizations, international standards. What I suggest using is using the UK government's AI principles so that they will match up to future legislation. Things around safety, security, and robustness, transparency and explainability, fairness, accountability and governance, contestability and redress. Start with those principles and embed them into your data strategies or the right policy documents. And then I guess the question for councils, and this is kind of the next bit, what are the capacities then you need to build, the capabilities you need to build as an authority to be able to put these principles into practice, to manifest them in actions and not just words and nice ideas. So the next slide, Rhiannon. We've broken it down into kind of 3 pots of actions, and obviously some of these overlap, some of these link together, but I think collectively the output of doing them well is that you can start to build public trust. The first one is public engagement and transparency, especially in local authorities. We need to understand what do our residents think about this, emerging use case that maybe it might affect a particular vulnerable group of residents, or how do we explain it to digitally excluded residents, or different elements around transparency. How does someone know that we're using AI in this service? So there's those sides of sort of outward facing capacities. There's, I think, the internal governance and policies and ways of working. So how do we, ensure that we're following GDPR, the equalities and human rights commitments that we have? Also, how do we, assure these processes through our procurement I mentioned earlier? So how do we get those internal processes right? And the last thing is the right skills for the right staff. So go back to the procurement bit. Do all the officers procuring AI know what questions to be asking when they're buying a product that might have AI, or how do data scientists have these skills for AI? So it's a skills question and capacities question on a sort of individual level there. I think altogether those things, as I said, if we do them well, we can start to sort of build towards that public trust, and that's my role, is kind of helping the councils do that. A couple of examples before I sort of go to the Q&A. Of councils in London who've done this well. So firstly, Camden, they have a data charter. It was created through 2 citizen panels, a set of 8 principles. So those principles I mentioned, basically the same principles worded slightly differently, but they did this 3 or 4 years ago. So it was really groundbreaking when they did this. And the council adheres to these principles. They've adopted a lot of internal processes around data sharing agreements. They have a dedicated role, so a particular role with a set of skills to ensure that data is used well. They have public outreach events, ethics assessments. And this is, I try to map these to the capabilities that I suggest councils adopt. A really good example of a bunch of those capabilities. If we go to the next slide. This is Brent's Data Ethics Advisory Board. So this was something they created in 2001 with LOTI's help. They have a combination of officers from different services, plus some external residents with relevant expertise. So people who maybe have worked in or with local government in the past or in technology. I think they've someone from the NHS, and they give independent advice to council officers on different projects. And this is quite a common approach. Brent were the first in London. There's a couple of other councils from outside London that did this quite early as well, like Essex. But we know, I think Barking and Dagenham recently set one up, and this is an approach that lots of councils are looking towards to get that expertise and advice when it comes to ethics. So there are a couple of examples. Rhiannon, I think we're about to finish my deck. I mentioned, I think, throughout some of the bits that LOTI are doing to help. Next slide. They kind of cover 4 things. So it's that identifying opportunities. I mentioned some of that research, and how we do that is working collaboratively across all of our boroughs and being really rigorous in understanding, what are the good use cases, what are the less good cases that we shouldn't be focusing on, how do we buy better, so what's the right technology, or how do we do that collaboratively? For those who have the skills in-house, how do we build better? And then that big piece on ethics. Next slide, Rhiannon. Here's, I guess, the 4 messages then I would really hope that councils would take away from this presentation. The first is the technology isn't the hurdle. I think AI is cool and it's very impressive, but in some ways, as for all bits of technology in local government, we don't need to build, new or more exciting bits of technology. There's so much out there that we could use, but it's those foundational sort of capabilities around data and design and skills and governance. They're the things that will unlock AI's value. The context matters, as I said, so different solutions, different ways of developing a thing. Maybe it's, different types of technology. They will differ from one council to another. So it's not a one size fits all. And actually, as I mentioned a few times, procurement, I think, is a really good place to focus on. It's where a lot of the decisions are made or will be made around adopting AI. And I think from the LOTI perspective, our big focus is on the evaluation and the sharing of those findings, so that as a sector in local government, we don't have to, repeat the same bits of experimenting to see what works or not 33 times in London or 300 times in England or however many times across different sectors. If we can do that really well, then we know that our adoption journey, we can do that much quicker and have, reap the benefits of that for us all collectively. So they're my messages, and I think I will finish my presentation there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sam. Okay, so colleagues, a PDF version of this slide deck will be circulated to all attendees and those that registered, and I appreciate that those that registered may not be attending today. I see lots of colleagues from different parts of London. I'm going to be opening up to questions, albeit I can't see people's faces and I can only see initials. And I'm just hoping if you are brave enough to show your faces, but I will also take hands up. It just makes it for a more personalised meeting and conversation. So I've got Councillor Elizabeth, and apologies, I don't want to mispronounce your surname. I've got Councillor Elizabeth Kangethe, but please do correct me if I've mispronounced that. Do you want to introduce yourself and which local authority you're from?
Right, Councillor Elizabeth Kangethe from the London Borough of Barking and Dagenham. I'm a cabinet member for education. My main concern or question is, you did say that there's a real risk on the being biased, the AI being biased. Don't you think that poses the the finest risk you can ever think about, because I would imagine someone being wrongly recognized. Yesterday, we did a course on facial recognition, and this goes hand in hand. I would think this is a real risk, and particularly in today's world where somebody ends up being, if it's biased and doesn't recognize me properly and gets me in trouble, that really, even to me, leave alone going out to the public, poses a risk. So what are you doing about that, or what can be done? I know there are risks in everything we do, but I feel that one is a concern. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to take another question. I've got 3 people with their hands up. I'm going to take all 3 questions and then we'll come back. And Elizabeth, you make a really good point. And Sam, if I may, I'd like to also respond to that. We've got Councillor Dement, Richard Dement. Did you want to ask your question, Richard? Okay, I'm going to move on to Councillor Irma Freeborn.
Sorry, I'm trying to. Okay, I've got my mic. I couldn't get access to the mic. Sorry about that. Hello, good afternoon,
Hello.
everybody. Hi. Thanks for the presentation, Sam. I'm a councillor from Barking and Dagenham, and thank you for mentioning the positives about using the software for the borough as an example. Moving forward, we have to embrace technology. We've got no choice in the matter, so to speak. But one of the anxieties for a lot of the residents is, and access to social media or even to smartphones, the demography of many of the boroughs that may not want to embrace change. How do we factor in going forward this new form of technology? I mean, it's not new, but it's been going for one of the longest times. And also, I just wanted to check on one of your slides, you mentioned about the acceptance for residents on different parts of aspects of using it in their daily life. What social groups was that survey compiled from? And also, just one final question for myself. How do members really fit in when using AI? Because obviously this is going to be an apparatus that's going to be used for years to come. Where do we fit in? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then I'm going to be inviting Councillor Rex Osborne to ask your question. Rex, did you still want to ask your question? I've lowered your hand now, but we can't hear you because you're on mute. Okay, I'm going to invite Sam to respond to the first 2 questions, and I'll make some additional comments as well, Sam, on those 2 points raised. So the first was in relation to the bias within the AI.
Yeah, so I think, great question. I think this is one of my biggest concerns as well. We do have existing legislation in GDPR in the form of our public sector equalities duty, also with human rights legislation. So for councils, we do already have it enshrined in law that effectively we shouldn't be doing this. The question is, how do we manifest these things into our ways of working, into our processes? In general, what we suggest in LOTI, so through the process of an impact assessment that you would do for a data project, that would involve a data protection impact assessment, but also an equalities impact assessment. You would map out the risks and you would try and understand then in the process of that AI product or that project you're doing, what are the specific risks and what would it look like if that risk was sort of happening in real terms? And then you have to sort of build into your sort of architecture of how you deliver a project. Firstly, you need to check long before you go live and do a thing that could affect a resident, be checking, is this risk happening or not? And then also, I think the really important thing is once you do go live, you're continually checking to make sure that this risk isn't actually manifesting. And if it does happen, you need to be able to quickly react to that. So you can, it might be to some degree stopping doing something and then going back to a different way of working. But I think that's a really practical way. I think another big thing is just more meaningful co-design with the residents who might be affected by those risks. In practice is a really, really good way of preventing those risks ever really happening. But sorry, May, you wanted to come in on this one as well.
I mean, okay, so my reflections on that really, really important question, and I think you're right to raise it, and it needs to be absolutely in the forefront of every single member's mind that is driving forward the use of AI as part of local authorities' transformation programs and driving efficiencies is this. We operate in a world and within institutions which are structurally discriminatory because there's conscious and unconscious bias, and the role that inequality, equality, diversity and inclusion policies have on that front and how that is manifested in practice is also crucial here. From my previous work as a researcher, my constant question when I was tasked with undertaking large-scale research projects and working with experts is the important element, that all-important element of the interpretive lens that is applied when you're looking at data and trying to make sense of what that data and the focus group fieldwork return is saying. And if you are not well versed in that community under focus or under the spotlight in any research endeavor, you will end up inherently building in bias. And I know it's a very live and intensely debated and mediated conversation within the industry, and I don't think anyone's cracked it. I do think there is a responsibility and duty on part of public bodies, not least because we're all needing to be compliant with the equalities duty and the extension of the equalities duty in this space. And I think that's a really interesting area of work that I would like to see London councils, LOTI, and the community that I'm quite keen, the member community that I'm quite keen to mobilise in this space, really amplifying, because I don't think there's been that much thought given to it. I think there's some really interesting work in academic circles, but I don't think it's surfacing through. And I think increasingly, as we see the use of AI and other technological innovations in the public sector world, not least because of public sector reform, these will become much more prescient questions that we're going to need to answer, if not to reverse the trust deficit issue that Sam highlighted in the earlier part of his presentation. And I would also want to assure you the person leading LOTI is Eddie Copeland, and he has been very much at the centre of these ethical questions. Because when the government launched its white paper on data back in 2021, there was a government architecture that was established. It's currently distributed between a couple of different departments, but there was a body of external experts that looked at some of these ethical issues, the degree to which issues of the equality strands as we understand them and issues of human rights. I don't know the depth to which they were pursued or explored, and maybe Eddie, not wanting to put you on the spotlight, you might want to comment on that. I also wanted to just briefly, Sam, before I brought you in on the second question, you know, the interface of this stuff and the role of councillors. I think, again, that's a really interesting one. I think there are some judgment calls to be made and an ethical framework that needs to be amplified as we, as elected representatives, when we step into office, be it at any level. about the appropriate and ethical use of these types of tools in the discharge of our responsibilities and duties as elected representatives, not least, you know, there are going to be implications around code of conduct, and I think this will need to be injected in the refresh and review of that, because we know that the new government wants to upgrade the code of conduct, but also in other areas. I mean, I've heard anecdotally there are councillors that are using AI to sift through their casework. I'm not sure whether or not that's been spotlighted sufficiently, and actually the ethics of that, and whether or not you're being transparent. We've got privacy security legislation that we've got to adhere to, and as it is, you know, we're already, you know, needing to maintain quality assurance, quality control in line with our security policies, just on doing things in the old world mode, let alone AI. So I think there's a lot that we're going to have to rapidly get to grips with, learn and instruct. Eddie, did you want to pick up anything across those two questions before I push back to Sam?
So just to say, the central government body you mentioned that I advised was the Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation. So central government has been very interested in these questions and how exactly as Sam has described, as the public sector being as transparent as we can with residents about where we're using AI, how we're using it, and involving them in designing that has been really important. And it's good to see that message coming through. But I think, yeah, just to endorse everything Sam has said, context is king here for those of you concerned about its use. It very much depends on the use case. What I would encourage is our community, so all of your chief digital officers or chief information officers and your information governance leads, we work very closely with them, certainly the 28 boroughs who are part of the LOTI community. We know all of them take this incredibly seriously. They talk to Sam a great deal. If there are other bits of your organizations you hear trying things that may not be looped in with your digital directors who've really got the knowledge of how these tools work, encourage them to engage with them. They've got the link back to Sam, who can then provide this advice. And as we learn together across London local government what works well. So we see a lot of boroughs doing absolutely the right thing, doing it very responsibly. But the more those digital teams are definitely aware of what all their colleagues are doing, that's really helpful. And it's how LOTI can be a support as well.
Super. Sam, over to you.
Thanks. And I'll just quickly flag the Equalities Human Rights Commission put out some research, I think in September, about the use of AI in local government. So if anyone's interested, you can go and read that. I guess the good news is I think 4 of their 5 case studies were London authorities. So we take that very seriously in London. That's something we've been pushing. And we'll be doing some work with them actually, and the Information Commissioner's Office developing some guidance for local authorities off the back of that. So we're really keen to keep supporting that. I've got quite a few different questions written down, so I'll answer some of them. I think if there's any I miss, then please do say. I think on the members, how they fit in, I think the big thing that members can maybe help councils with that we're not doing so well is understanding the concerns of residents when it comes to using AI, having those conversations face to face, and feeding back to officers, or really understanding those concerns. That research I shared at the start, you'll note that almost very few of those case studies actually directly, or the things they mention that they're doing research on directly, relate to local government services. So there's a bit of a gap there. And I think being able to help support that whilst we build up our understanding as authorities and our ability to do that consistently would be really, really useful. I've got a few other bits. I think it was an interesting question around the demography of boroughs and embracing the ways of change. At LOTI, we work with the GLA and with the authorities a lot on digital inclusion and building digitally inclusive services. And part of that means using better technology. So it's not necessarily technology that makes it harder to access our services, but actually you can use new and emerging technology to make it easier to access our services. Obviously, we know in some ways that's not happening. And so we also need to be wary when we design our services that we're not designing something that precludes someone from accessing them because they've become, too high a bar in terms of technology knowledge. So it's getting that balance, but I think there's an opportunity if we use technology well to make it easier to use our services. There were a couple of, were there any other key questions I've missed in my?
Hang on one second. There was one just in relation to Councillor Dimment. He's the Cabinet Member for Highways and Waste and Recycling, experience of using AI in these areas. Please, especially fly tipping. God, if I can crack fly tipping, I will just feel on top of the world.
I've seen a few bits on fly tipping. I think they're like pilots, but I think especially in combination with sensors and sensor technology, so in the sort of areas where we know that the fly tipping happens a lot, rather than having to wait for someone to report it or for an officer to go out and check, that you can find ways of getting the feedback loop sort of automated to massively speed that up. I'm not sure that's necessarily stopping the fly tipping, but in terms of, you know, improving the service, I don't know if a specific use case of that in London, but I've seen that from suppliers mention that.
And I'm just wondering whether prior to us distributing the slide deck, if we can add any other examples relating to highways and waste and recycling for the benefit of colleagues like Councillor Dimment. Right, we are 6 minutes over. I'm going to call it quits for now. It's been interesting, I trust, for all of you. Thank you all for your questions, including those that were posted in the chat. Apologies for some of the tech issues around muting, unmuting, and I look forward to seeing you at a future data innovation, including all things AI series of discussions.